Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
The car braked sharply and Eugene's body. The force of inertia threw him backwards. The businessman's head described an ellipse in the air. And in the final phase, it came down on his head with a swing. A funny thought went through the man's mind. Probably this is the kind of tests they do with astronauts. But the flush of positivity instantly disappeared, and the anger that had accumulated since morning spilled out on the driver in a poisonous cloud. "Moron, what are you doing? You're not hauling firewood." The outburst of frustration made the boys squeeze their heads into their shoulders. Stammering, he began to justify himself. "I'm sorry, Eugene, but if I hadn't slowed down in time, there would have been trouble. You see that white Audi over there? Looks like it's driven by a cretin or a fucking extremist. He was gonna cut us off." Eugene Grimes rubbed his neck, wincing in pain. "And if you're expecting a thank you, you're hoping for nothing. And the next time you do something like that, you're gonna get corked out of your job." "Sec." The driver, barely audible, mumbled. Mike had had a hard time finding this bread and butter place and was afraid of being out of work again. For more than 2 months he had been serving Grimes, but there was no way he could settle into his character. The businessman was too kind, or he would tear up and throw up for no reason. Today he was clearly off on the wrong foot. Mike noticed it at once. Sad thoughts made the guy distracted for a while. So from all sides drivers were pressing the klaxon and trying to shout to him. Since now Grimes' car was the only obstacle to normal traffic. The statuesque passenger had to once again exert verbal influence on the impressionable drivers. Eugene leaned forward slightly and bellowed loudly, "What are you standing there for? Can't you see that a traffic jam has formed because of you? What are you stopping for? You weren't raised in a boarding school for the retarded, by any chance." Mike, I really wanted to sass the chief for humiliating him. But he clenched his teeth tightly and kept silent. The car moved smoothly. From the back seat came a loud sigh of relief. "I finally got it. I'd thought we'd be stuck in the middle of the road." Grimes liked to operate with unfamiliar words, though he completely failed to understand the meaning of many metropolitan expressions. He had inherited such a lexical load from his aunt Adriana. The woman many years ago voluntarily undertook the obligation to bring up her nephew. But for 10 years, the aunt has given up a lot and now needed care herself. Therefore, Eugene sheltered a relative in his mansion, so that the elderly woman felt in complete comfort. He hired a housekeeper. At first, Adriana was strongly opposed to this decision, and at one time even resented her nephew. "I have not yet reached the stage of people who are able to cope with the house. Why spend money on servants? He joked gently, for you, grandfather. I do not spare any money. You're my queen in life, and I feel it is my duty to provide you with royal living conditions." Adriana sighed for a while and then accepted the presence of a strange woman in the house. Later, they even became friends with Anna and played cards in the evenings to pass the time. But this morning, the aunt shocked her nephew with unpleasant news. "Eugene, you were late last night, and I didn't want to spoil your mood." He tried to make a joke out of habit. "Adriana, I was spoiled without you last night. So I didn't sleep much last night. Just a little bit in the morning, you know. And now my head is buzzing like a cauldron. So one more hit in my honey barrel won't change a thing. Tell me what happened." Auntie's eyes widened in an expressive way. "Anna's leaving. Said she couldn't be torn in two anymore." The news really struck the man. He looked suspiciously at the elderly relative. "You didn't have a fight with her, did you?" All the same, more girls rounded their eyes. "I'm not a provocateur, and me and my leg have nothing to share. I don't know why she suddenly decided to break up. She's got a good salary, and she's got a good job. She gave you a reason." The aunt sighed heavily and looked away. That gesture was a sign that the woman was trying to hide something. The aunt's tone changed when she told you the reason. Anna said she was very tired, and there were some problems at home with her son. But I think it's because of Vanessa, and she's very sensitive. She once confessed to me that she couldn't bear to look at sick children. Adriana was ready to burst into tears, so Eugene had to change to a sterner tone. Don't be upset. Auntie will manage. Anna can go wherever she wants. I won't hold anyone back. I hope she will give us time to find her replacement." The old woman shrieked noisily. I asked her, and she said she could only work until the end of the week. Grimes remembered that today was Thursday, which meant there was only one day left. It would be impossible to find a decent housekeeper in such a short time. He understood all the difficulties of the situation, as well as the fact that he could not leave his aunt with her sick daughter. The old woman simply could not cope with such a load, as it was pointless to solve such a serious problem on the fly. He tried to reassure his relative. "I will look for a new employee today. Don't you get upset. You shouldn't be. You told me yourself that everything is for the best, and we will definitely succeed. And the day will come when our Vanessa will recover." Eugene tried to reassure his aunt, and the only joy in a man's life was his daughter. It was for her sake. He tried by all means to increase the family capital. He dreamed that his only heiress never needed anything, but trouble warned him where he didn't expect it. About a year ago, Vanessa began to complain of severe weakness. The girl literally fell off her feet from fatigue, and this in second grade. She and her aunt thought it was just a normal childish whim. They became seriously worried when the girl lost her senses right during the lesson. Vanessa studied in an elite gymnasium, and Grimes was fully confident in the professionalism of the staff of this institution. So after the incident, he sounded the alarm. "We should get her to a doctor. Maybe she's not bleeding enough. It happens a lot in children." Since Grimes was a prominent businessman, no one could refuse him. The very next day, his daughter was examined by the best specialists in town. The conclusion stunned the loving father. "We're sorry, but your girl has malignant leukemia." It sounded like a sentence for a 9-year-old girl. The man lost his ability to speak and made strange noises for several minutes. The doctor was frightened by this reaction and hurried to calm the unfortunate man. "Eugene, you can't overreact. The achievements of modern medicine can achieve amazing results in the treatment of cancer. Children are especially promising in this regard, and very often doctors are able to achieve a full recovery. So there is reason to hope for a good outcome." It was only after these encouraging words that Grimes came to his senses. Interesting people, you medical professionals. Although fortunately, I rarely have to deal with you. But every time I'm amazed at your ability to first destroy all hope in a person, and then say that everything is almost all right. The professor who evaluated the results, Vanessa, didn't understand the irony. We're not omnipotent, but there's always a chance. Your case is no exception. And with the right therapy, there is a chance to suppress the process of the professor. At least 5 minutes proved to him how important it is to set the patient on a favorable course. At the same time, he flaunted incomprehensible medical terms, which made Eugene completely despondent. The only understandable fact was that his daughter was seriously ill and needed long-term treatment. That same day, Vanessa was admitted to a specialized clinic, and in the life of Eugene Grimes began the most difficult period. Due to a serious illness, the girl had to drop out of school and switch to homeschooling. During the next few months, the girl several times went to the hospital for another course of treatment, and then returned home completely powerless. Therefore, the father tried to create special conditions for his daughter. Just a few days ago, the boy was released home after another course of therapy. The news of Anna's sudden departure took Grimes by surprise, because he had some serious business problems. The man thought about all of this on his way to the main office. He even involuntarily burst out. "What a bad day today. Mike has already managed to forget about his offense from the former cheerfulness." Asked Eugene, "Did you say something?" Grimes smirked. "Yes, I did. I had a bad day this morning. I'm sitting here wondering what bad luck is. How do you deal with bad luck?" Mike showed real skill in the vise, in the chief's car, in the narrow space in the parking lot outside the office. After the successful operation, he asked want some advice. Grimes, with the same smirk, replied, "Go ahead. Roll with it. Try not to think about this very bad luck. The more a person thinks about problems, the more weighty they become. It's a proven fact. I've experienced it myself, so to speak." Eugene, for the first time in 2 months, looked with respect at the boy, whom he hired reluctantly at the request of an acquaintance. The latter had asked very much for Mike, assuring him of the boy's decency. Today, the young driver had impressed the chief for the first time. Perhaps it was the only positive fact in a series of troubles. Grimes strode briskly toward the building, clearing his mind of extraneous thoughts as he went. He took the elevator to the 6th floor and flew through the reception area to the office on his way, tossing to the secretary, "Invite Jones, this is urgent." No sooner had Eugene made himself comfortable in his supervisor's chair. As the head of the supply department, trembling and lost from intense excitement, timidly crossed the threshold of the office. Eugene was summoned. Grimes cast a fleeting glance in the direction of his subordinate and a glance across the table at you, Jones. "I do not propose, for I have no desire to converse with you in a respectful tone." Jones barely audibly jumped. "Eugene, what have I done wrong this time?" Grimes elevated himself above the table. "It's the same thing. The fool is the one who tries to cheat me, and you, Jones, are the chief of those fools. You must have forgotten that my basic education is economics. I also have a law degree." The boss threw a lightning-like glare at his subordinate, and Jones shrank like an air mattress with all the air drained out of it. "Eugene, I still don't understand what you suspect me of." Grimes has lost patience, and they are suspicious, and I'm warning you for the last time. Stop stealing my money. You must have forgotten that I personally check all financial documents, and I have a special instinct for fraud. Try to explain to me, Gleb, why, for example, all tenders are won by one company, Magnum. How is it different from other suppliers? After that question, Jones went numb, and Grimes pushed him. "Shut up, then I'll answer it for you. It's all about Magnum, a company with a very dubious reputation." Your relative's working on Jones' forehead. A dense vapor has set in. Panicked thoughts whirled around in his head. The man instantly turned very pale with exertion. Grimes noticed what was happening to the subordinate and slightly slowed down and the idea of a tablet. "The secretary will give it to you." "I don't want you to give up here in front of my eyes." Jones nodded vigorously and backed toward the exit. Grimes wiped his fingers with wet wipes as if he had just touched a disgusting substance. "Jones, I hope you realize that this is my last warning. Work honestly and you'll sleep well." Jones slipped out the door and Grimes immediately summoned a secretary. "Tell Favors that I am waiting for her." The girl promptly obeyed the chief's command. But Maria Favors, unlike the previous visitor, behaved very confidently in the chief's office. Grimes was satisfied with the report of the chief of the press service. "I wish everyone worked like you, Maria. Everything is clear and to the point." The chief's praise of Catholics bound the tender female soul. But all emotions Favors restrained within herself. She confined herself to the laconic. "Thank you, Eugene, for your appreciation of the work of our department." Grimes thought for a few seconds, and then asked Maria, "I have a personal favor to ask of you." The woman did not even tense up, and with the same readiness she answered, "I will try to do everything I can for you. You know that my daughter is seriously ill." Favors, with a nod of the head, confirmed this fact. The woman who was taking care of her and helping us around the house suddenly decided to quit. "I understand you, Eugene. I will try to find a replacement for your employee. Tell me, do you have any special requests?" Grimes answered right away. "The most important thing for me is that she be a good person. She's only 9 years old. She's just a little girl. She's been through such a misfortune. Of course, it would be nice if the woman had a pedagogical education. We're way behind the school program." Favors has assured the chief that she'll be looking for one right away and demanding a candidate. Grimes breathed a sigh of relief, for he knew that Maria was a woman of her word. Betty threw an absent look at the boxes of her belongings and the disassembled pieces of furniture. That seemed to be it. All that was left was to wait for the car and see to the loading of things. She tried not to think about how she would live her life. In principle, it didn't matter anymore, because Betty didn't care now, so as not to lose her mind at all. The woman encouraged herself half-heartedly. Betty not to despair at all. Things may yet get better for you. A lot of people are like that, when everything falls apart at once, and then suddenly there is a ray of hope. The woman looked at the calendar that hung on the wall as a reminder of her past happy life. "Did I forget to take it off for you? I'm sorry, I'll make it up to you." She carefully removed the brightly colored booklet with positive pictures and noticed that she hadn't marked her days for a long time. The habit of accompanying her actions with words worked again, and the woman turned to the calendar with sadness. "Well, friend, tell me, what day is today? March 20 or 21? And then she answered, "I think it's Friday, the 20th. Let's see what the day has in store for us." Betty turned the calendar page and quickly found the information she was looking for. Oh, turns out it's a day that's not so ordinary. It's the vernal equinox and winter is coming. It's coming to an end. It's a good time to think about starting a new life. A demanding call at the door interrupted the woman's train of thought. But she did not even flinch from surprise, but rather indifferently said openly, "Come in and don't be afraid." The door immediately opened. Betty said disappointedly, "It's you again. Do you have to remind me every day?" "As you can see, the apartment is already empty." "Not today. I'm selling it tomorrow." Bailiffs. They're the ones who decided to disturb the widow in the morning hours. They weren't embarrassed at all. They made a masterly inspection of the whole place. The man who was in charge of the duo said to Betty, "It is not for us to ask such questions to your spouse." The woman didn't let the official finish his thought and nervously interrupted him. "All right. Tomorrow just 40 I will go to the cemetery and be sure to ask my late husband. How could he do this to me? Hopefully he'll give me a sign from the grave." The performer realized that he had made an inexcusable mistake in talking to the young widow and tried to apologize. "We sincerely sympathize with your grief. But the law is the law. You must realize that it's in your best interest to speed up the repayment process, because interest is accruing every day." Betty ran her hand over her face tiredly. "I'm aware of that. As you can see, the process is in full swing. But I don't want to give up my apartment for nothing. It's my only place to live, by the way. You see, I have nowhere to go. I can't go to the train station, can I? You left me nothing. Even the furniture and my personal belongings have been described, and this is despite the fact that I have not yet inherited. The second executor is younger." Rudely interrupted Betty's debtor. "That's your problem. We're not a charitable organization. We're in the business of collecting debts. You'll have to pay your late husband's debts anyway, so it's best not to create artificial obstacles. Thank you for not kicking me and beating me out of my money." Betty did something akin to a curtsy. In truth, it made the little official even angrier. "Citizen, be careful with your words, or we can charge you with insulting someone during the performance." The young colleague dragged the older coworker to the door. "Having warned the landlady the other day, we're still seeing you, whether you like it or not. We are obliged to supervise your compliance with the court order." In the empty apartment, the sound of closing all the doors seemed very loud. Betty's whole body shuddered and immediately began to calm herself. "Be patient, friend. You just don't have any other options. Yes, your hubby gave you a piggyback ride, but you can't speak ill of the dead. At least you got a chance for a fresh start, although it's foolish to give yourself the benefit of the doubt." At 36, despair burst out with a scream. Betty joined the wall and began to slowly slide to the floor. Why is everything like this? Why is it me that all of this happened to me? The woman's tearful eyes stared pleadingly into the structure on the forest ceiling, as if that was where the answers to the widow's many troubling questions were hidden. 15 years ago, when Betty Svikova married a young but successful entrepreneur, she could not even in a terrible dream imagine what would be the end of her family happiness. She always liked independent, established men. Arthur Williamson fully met these criteria, so Betty did not hesitate to agree to his proposal to become a wife, even though they had been dating for less than 2 months. But Aunt Camille, the sister of her late father, the girls, upon learning of the impending wedding, was horrified. "Betty, what are you thinking? Do you know that your Arthur was a gangster in the 90s? I can't even begin to imagine how many lives he's ruined." Betty calmly replied to her aunt, "I know my future husband's biography very well, but that doesn't change anything, because at that time everyone was surviving as best they could." The aunt was indignant. How can you speak so calmly? After all, your father's life was taken by scumbags like your Arthur. Auntie, how do you know that? The inquest found no one responsible for Daddy's death, and you claim to know what really happened? The aunt had nothing to answer because she really had nothing else but assumptions. As a final argument, the woman cited her own intuition as proof. Betty, you're still young and inexperienced, and I've lived half of my life in this world. And my heart tells me that your Arthur is a wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, he pretends to be a decent man, but he's really a thug. For the sake of your father's memory, come to your senses. Betty didn't suffer from levity like most girls her age. She had been left without parental care at a very early age, and Aunt Camille had replaced her father and mother. She had not told her niece for a long time how her parents had died. She was afraid of traumatizing the girl's psyche. Even when Betty was old enough to tell her the secret, her aunt only told her in generalities. In his youth, your daddy graduated from a mechanical engineering institute and worked at a factory. The perestroika came, and the enterprise was shut down, and people were thrown out on the street. He was a very responsible man. He understood that he was responsible for his wife and daughter. He and your mom, even before the damned wind of change blew, managed to buy a car in turn, and your father began to drive people in the evenings. Although the earnings were not particularly large, but there was enough for bread and milk. Episodes from that period often stirred Betty's memory. She remembers well the cherry-colored car, which was the pride of her father. After all, it was about this car that the daring girls from the popular combination group sang. After each trip, Daddy would tidy up his favorite car. See, daughter, what an extraordinary car your daddy has. They even sing songs. Betty believed in her father's version and diligently helped her father to keep the legendary car in decent condition. But one day her father didn't come home. Her mother thought he'd gotten some out-of-town customers, probably asked for a ride somewhere in the country or even the neighboring region. Don't worry, Betty, your father will be back by lunchtime. But lunch arrived, then her dinner, accidentally discovered by mushroomers in the forest of the neighboring region. The car wasn't there. What did it say about the mercenary motive for the crime? Buried the man with the whole house, because Ira's mother did not have money even for a coffin. The investigation was soon closed because it was considered that Ilya Svetkov himself left this world. Valentina long went to different offices, trying to find the truth, but the woman everywhere sent to a known address. That evening, my mother took earrings to Aunt Camille and promised to pick you up tomorrow. Did you obey your aunt? Don't spoil yourself. The girl waited for her mother all the next day, but she never showed up. And the next day, Aunt Camille cried a lot in the morning and told someone to think of her daughter. I, too, have gone to the extreme many times, but I've never looked for the truth at the bottom of the glass. And now, as soon as I think of my children, bad thoughts disappear. An unfamiliar voice contradicted Aunt Camille. At least you have a job, and the children are all grown up. Your daughter-in-law has no support left. After her husband died, the aunt interrupted. Don't grown-up children need help, and I can't live on my salary. That's why I trade in all sorts of nonsense to stay afloat. The women began to discuss the advantages of the market economy. Ira became uninterested in listening to them. She went into the kitchen, where work was in full swing. The girl asked Aunt Camille, "We are having a party today, and my mother is coming to it." The aunt darted her eyes away and clutched at her heart. The unfamiliar woman, who was cutting sausage with a huge knife, pressed the earring against her and began to whisper, "Your mommy won't come, little girl. She'll never come. She's dead." Later, Betty learned that her mother had poisoned herself with poor-quality drink when she didn't come for her daughter in the morning, and her aunt, smelling something wrong, went to their apartment. The door was wide open. It was not difficult to guess from the commotion in the apartment what a noisy party there had been the day before. Apart from the landlady, 2 other women had almost fallen victim to the fun. 2 other women. But the paramedics managed to pump them out. With great difficulty, Aunt Camille sold the bad apartment and took the orphaned former niece in. Your allowance is small, so the money from the apartment will be very useful to us. I'll put it aside for your studies. Aunt Rhea had not only her own life, but also the life of her little niece. Day after day, she beat into the girl's head that only educated people can find happiness in life. Until she was 15, Betty believed in her aunts and her version of the world order. But then she realized that luck comes to those who have a lot of dough, so that her niece did not turn from the right path of aunts and had to make a lot of effort. When after the first year of Pedagogical Institute, Irinka suddenly said that she had made a mistake with the choice of profession, Aunt Camille stood on the fringes. "It seems to you, girl, only seems. I'll give you a diploma, whatever it costs me." To realize this project, the relative even used forbidden methods. At one time, she openly followed her niece until she was ashamed. "Aunt Camille, I'll go to lectures. I'll get that damn diploma. But I beg you, don't follow me." For a while, the aunt was still following me, but in a covert way. The woman's close tutelage helped Betty to get an education. Aunt Camille cried for a long time when her niece showed her diploma. In a fit of emotion, she turned to late brother. "Now I can die in peace because your daughter and my niece did her duty on her own feet. She's got a good profession." The girl had a different opinion about that. She had not worked in the school in a year when she met Arthur Williamson, who completely changed her ideas about real life. After the wedding, her husband immediately told Betty, "I don't want you to work. My status doesn't allow it." Arthur and made this demand in such a tone that Betty took his words as an order. For the first 6 months of married life, the young woman enjoyed a rich life, but then she became bored. Her husband could stay away from home 24 hours a day. He never initiated her into his affairs and always answered questions evasively. "My little fish, I'm busy worrying about our future. If I relax for a minute, everything can fall apart." When Betty got pregnant a year after the wedding, her husband was not happy as she expected, but expressed his displeasure. "It's a little early for you and me to have kids. I hope you know what to do." The shock was so severe that 2 days later the woman had a miscarriage. She stayed in the hospital for a week, and her husband brought her huge bags of fruit and flowers to her room every day. The neighbors envied Betty for such a man, like behind a stone wall. But she couldn't tell strangers that her happiness was just a mirage. Betty longed to fall in love with her aunt again. But the relative had already sold her apartment and left to live with her eldest son after the first collapse of her hopes. And Betty completely resigned herself to fate. She no longer dreamed of a bright and joyful future. The monotonous days and weeks flew by, but nothing changed. Arthur was completely immersed in his business. She was his free appendix. Shortly before his death, her husband once said at dinner Betty was spotted. "You and I have one very important thing to do." She was used to the fact that her opinion didn't matter in her husband's house. That's why I was surprised by that and the unintentionally dropped phrase. "Arthur, what are you talking about?" On the man's face wandered a mysterious smile. "About nothing like that. I'm not about to turn 50. And I have no hair." Betty stared at her spouse in bewilderment. It seemed to her that she had heard or that Arthur Williamson, who had once deprived her of the opportunity to become a mother, was sitting in front of her. Resentment sickeningly skated to her throat, and she spat in the face of this self-righteous. And Pavlik all that many years saved up in the soul. "You think that everything in this life should happen at your click. It's a little late. You've come to your senses. Honey, your son would be 13 now if you hadn't given up on him." But his wife's longing-filled words, and even her tears, did not impress the man. He answered very calmly. It was not the time to have children then. Betty asked with a sneer now, "Then the hour of X has come." "Did you ask me?" He stared at her for about a minute as if he had just met her. "If you don't want to have a baby, there are others who do. You women are such creatures, you'll do anything for pretty trinkets, won't you? Anyway, think about my offer." Betty, after that conversation, roared all night. She was hurt and humiliated to realize that her husband treats her as a thing that can be thrown away or replaced. But at the same time, she realized that she was nothing without him. Becoming parents, those Williamson never succeeded. Arthur's business had gotten into serious trouble, and for over a month he was not himself. One day he received a call on his cell phone, and after talking to an unknown caller, the man felt sick. Betty called an ambulance and Arthur was taken to the hospital. For 8 days, he was in intensive care, and on the 9th day, he died of a massive heart attack. Then, during the most difficult days, Betty learned that her husband was deep in debt and credit. The bailiffs first came to describe the property when the man was still alive. They were not embarrassed by the fact that the defendant was in intensive care. They performed their duties with ostensible indifference, advising Betty to pay off his debts as soon as possible. Shortly after the bailiffs left, employees of the freight transportation company showed up. Quite quickly, they took out the furniture, which Betty decided to sell cheaply to her neighbor Aunt Rye. The elderly woman was very happy when the widow made her a tempting offer. "Oh, and I've been planning to change the furniture at the dacha for a long time. My husband and I renovated my parents' house, and all the old junk she had to throw out for obvious reasons. We were going to buy new furnishings, but in stores such prices on the joy of the buyer agreed to even pay for the services of movers from his own pocket, which was also a huge plus for the widow, because all the proceeds from the sale of property money should have gone to cover the debts of her late husband. But besides the obligatory items of expenditure, it was necessary to leave money for living. With this question, there was a complete impasse. Betty thoughtfully whispered, "Where will I live tomorrow?" It's scary to even think about. Betty felt uncomfortable in her empty apartment. She wandered aimlessly through the rooms, not knowing what to do next. Around noon, her empty stomach reminded her that she needed food, as all the dishes and furniture had gone to their new mistress. The widow decided to eat somewhere on the side. She had to go on foot to find a catering point, as her husband's new car had been sold a month ago. With the sale of her litter soap, Betty decided to hold off for now, secretly hoping she wouldn't have to. "If there isn't enough money, then I'll sell mine too." The woman grinned crookedly, remembering how her husband had criticized her choice of car. "Betty, is this a car for a real lady?" "It is, in which you can only travel around the city. And I don't plan to travel long distances. And where would I go, Arthur? Only to the store and the market." My husband did not impose his opinion. "See for yourself. If you like this model, I won't discourage you. By the way, could you visit your aunt or meet some of your girlfriends?" Arthur was the epitome of generosity and kindness that day, although he knew perfectly well that his wife's aunt had long gone to the other side of the country. And with all her friends, she had cut off all relations in the early years of her marriage. Only with Svetlana Ilchenko. She called occasionally to vent. Betty thought that her memory had planted the idea not in vain, and from the branch she took out her cell phone and quickly found the right number. "Hi, it's been a while since we've talked. How would you like to meet?" Her school friend was glad to receive her call and expressed her willingness to meet even now. Youthful excitement filled the woman's heart, and she hurried to the cafe where we always have lunch. Jenna and Betty make unparalleled coffee there, and the prices don't bite so much. That's the word the meeting place was a stone's throw away. But Betty took it in stride anyway, desperate to share her worries with someone. And deep down, she hoped that Jenna would help her find a job and temporary housing. With Ilchenko, they had sat at the same desk at school for several years, and then their paths had diverged. Betty entered the pedagogical school, and Jenna decided to learn the fashionable profession of makeup artists at that time. Despite the risks, the girl immediately decided to work for herself. The first 3 years, she put beauty on the lady with a small capital opened her own salon. According to rumors, in her personal life and classmate too, everything was quite successful. Betty entered the cafe and immediately heard the calling cry, "Betty, I'm here. Fly over." The friend settled down at a table in a cozy corner of the small hall and decided, "I hope you'll forgive me for being unauthorized. But I've ordered a skewer for 2. I don't have much time, but we can chat freely for half an hour." Jenna laid it all out in one breath, while Betty made herself comfortable at the table. Only then did she remember that she hadn't offered condolences to her friend. "Betty, I'm sorry, it slipped my mind. That you're alone now. I can't tell you how sorry I am. If you need any help, don't hesitate. Goodbye." Jenna had time to eat and talk. There was an endless stream of positivity coming from this charming woman. Betty felt somewhat relieved. "I'm afraid I'll be misunderstood." if I start whistling right now. Elchenko froze with her mouth full just saying goodbye to the pie. She said in a businesslike tone, "It seems that you're really screwed. If you are ready for unconventional actions, lay out everything in order. I'll think about it as I go along." Betty didn't have to beg long and briefly told her friend about her predicament. As she spoke, Jenna's face showed anger and confusion. What angered her most was that Betty's late husband had spent considerable sums of money on his mistress. "Of course, I've met a lot of scoundrels in my life, but this is the first time. I'm sorry, but your Arthur doesn't deserve a kind word. How low can you go to leave your wife with such debts?" Betty grinned lightly. "It's not the whole picture. Imagine I still had to pay the bills my husband spent on his mistress." Elchenko screamed so loudly. "Betty, are you a fool for making the staff of the establishment worried?" A waiter ran up to their table. "Ladies, please be quiet. We value our reputation very much." Jenna paid the bill and after a second of confusion added 2 more large bills. "This is for your establishment as compensation. Can we sit here for another 5 minutes? We'll be on our best behavior." Honestly, the waiter gave them a smile. "Take all the time you need. If you feel like ordering coffee, I'll be right here." Jenna clicked her tongue. The kid's got a lot going for him, and he's got a nice face. That's the kind of character that attracts customers. Betty gave her friend a look that made her glaze over. "I'm sorry, Betty, but I always get a professional hunch. It's something like sniff and cheek." Noticing that Betty had picked up her purse, Elchenko patted himself Porto with the palm of his hand. "I'm not telling all my friends. That is, I wanted to say that it's time to get to the point. From everything you told me, I realized that you need a job and a place to live." Betty put her purse back where it belongs. "Yeah, at least we'll have to find something for a while. But I don't know where to start." Jenna raised her eyes upward, and with her foot she began to march and rhythm. It lasted about a minute, and then her friend said confidently, "No problem with housing. I can offer you to live at our dacha for a while. It's not far outside the city, about 15 minutes by car from work." "So far I cannot think of anything. You're not going to agree to waving a rag and a broom." Betty exhaled. "I wouldn't want to. But if I can't find anything suitable, I'll have to." She didn't have time to finish her sentence because Svetka slapped the Eureka table. How could I forget? The waitress jumped out from behind the partition separating the hall from the kitchen. Jenna waved at him. "It's okay. We can have another cup of coffee." The guy rushed to fulfill the order, and Elchenko gave his friend a sly wink. "You remember Maria Simmons? She's Maria Favors now." Betty strained her memory and with great difficulty remembered the main activist of their school. Semenova was always ahead of the curve and often blew the whistle for the whole school at significant events. Jenna did not wait for Betty's answer. "Just the other day I was in the region on business, more precisely, at the presentation of new products of a well-known company. Anyway, there I crossed Simmons, that is, with Favors. Imagine, she is the press secretary of Grimes himself, the CEO of this very company. I have the name somewhere in my notebook, but that's not important. What's important is that the man urgently needs a woman with a teaching degree." Betty's burning hopes were instantly extinguished. "Stata, I've been working at the school for less than a year. My diploma is no longer valid, and I'm not going to show it." Elchenko waved his hand carelessly. "Yes, in no hurry to refuse. Anyway, I'll give you Maria's phone number. Call her to find out what's what." Jenna on a napkin wrote down the number. "Don't put it off. Call her right now. According to Maria, this businessman's situation is catastrophic. His little daughter seems to be sick, and he has no one to take care of her." Hastily hummed and pecked her friend on the cheek and immediately disappeared. Betty stared at the napkin with an unfamiliar number written on it in confusion. She flinched when the waiter's voice came from the side. "You were just leaving. What about the coffee?" A miniature tray held the same doll-like cups of the disbelieving beverage. Betty smiled. "Your coffee is really great, and I'd love to have another cup." The waiter carefully placed one appliance on the table and just as quickly removed himself with his tray. Betty pictured the guy happily drinking the free coffee. She looked at her napkin again and pulled out her phone. Maria Favors answered immediately. I am very pleased that you responded with all the details in person. So if possible, please come right over today. Betty mumbled timidly, but I have no acquaintances in the city. If you have no place to stay, this issue is solvable. Don't think about domestic difficulties. Come and dial me immediately. Betty didn't expect the case to take such a quick turn, but she didn't want to miss the opportunity. It was 80 kilometers to the regional center, and the woman decided to get to her car, although there was excitement in her soul. But for the first time in the last 15 years, there was hope that she would be able to change her monotonous life. Vanessa leaned over the table in a creative burst, and Betty watched as the skinny child's hand put strokes and drawing on the paper. The girl's artwork was virtually indistinguishable from the artwork of children of that age. The prize spot and the cottage with a pair of cats was surrounded by a hedge, from behind which could be seen the crowns of trees and a dog box. The manner of execution was unusual. Strict, straight lines and strokes made the drawing aggressive. The complete absence of bright colors added to the unpleasant impression. Betty cautiously asked Vanessa, "Why did you draw everything with a simple pencil? Where are the flowers?" The girl looked up, and Betty felt uneasy at her piercing gaze. But it was the girl's words that caused the consternation. Where the dead live, flowers don't grow. Everything is gray there, trees, grass, and sky. For a moment, it seemed to the woman that something cold touched her neck, and she shuddered. Shouldn't you be painting the realm of the dead? Look how many interesting things there are around. The girl stepped and angrily said, "Why should I look at all this and memorize? If I'm going to die soon anyway. Who told you such nonsense?" Anna, when the doctors told her I had cancer, she was immediately frightened and said she didn't want to work for us anymore because she was afraid of getting infected. Betty physically felt like a terror. More and more possessed her by the minute. But the worst part was the 9-year-old girl's casual talk of her illness and imminent death. The new mentor was scolding her predecessor in her heart. What kind of a heartfelt person do you have to be to say such a thing out loud to a child? She calmly said, "Your Anna has deceived you. Many children with a diagnosis like yours have overcome the disease and made a full recovery, and you will definitely get better." Vanessa looked her straight in the eyes again. "You say that to reassure me. Your father must have told you to. He tells me every morning, too, that I'm going to get better. But I keep getting better and better, and I keep getting worse." Betty sat down next to her ward and softly put her arm around her skinny shoulders. "The thing is, little girl, pills and shots are not enough to get better. You have to believe. And that starts with a smile. You have a beautiful smile, by the way." Vanessa was a little embarrassed by her pale lips, stretched the boaters. Educated by this reaction, Betty continued, "You see, it's nice to smile yourself, and it doesn't hurt so much anymore." True to her word, the girl nodded her head with a short hedgehog of trailing hair in agreement. Betty continued the therapy session. "You're doing a great job of smiling. Now try drawing a different house. Make it bright and the trees green. And let the little dog peek out of the box. Do you like dogs?" A smile came back on the girl's pale face. "I do. We used to have a typhoon, but then he ran off with a puppy. Daddy didn't want it. I begged him to. What kind of dogs do you like? Try drawing one." Vanessa was confused for a second. She first put her sad drawing aside, but then moved it back to her. "Okay, Betty, I'll give it a try. Can I call you without the middle name? It's taking so long to get it right." Betty stroked the young artist's head and marveled at the softness from the working hair. In her mind, she had associated a hedgehog hairstyle with something prickly. The woman thought painfully to herself, "Poor thing. Her defiance of rejection is only ostentatious. In reality, she is like a lonely flower in the desert." Betty felt like clasping the girl to herself, but she was afraid to frighten her with such a display of affection. Meanwhile, Vanessa took out of the drawer a set of colored felt-tip pens, and the first thing she did was to paint their house. The creative process quickly carried her away, and soon a 4-legged shaggy creature of fiery colors appeared next to the empty booth. Vanessa painted and commented, "Sure, he didn't look much like Typhoon, but he was also ginger and very kind. When I gave him cookies, he always licked my hand. He didn't like candy. He He would spit them out so funny. Vanessa laughed, and Betty was surprised to note that the girl's laughter was ringing like a bell. Soon flowers appeared on the girl's drawings, and the blue sky was filled with sunshine and white clouds. Throughout the creative process, Betty encouraged the little girl. "You have talent. Your drawings will grace any exhibition." Encouraged by the praise, the little girl confessed, "I can also draw people." "That's great. Do you want me to draw you?" "I'd like to, but you be my witch." "Okay." Betty agreed to let the girl paint her as a fairy tale character. Vanessa took a blank sheet of paper and set to work, although her sorceress turned out with slanted eyes. Overall, the drawing was positive. Suddenly the girl asked Betty, "Do you have children, a son or a daughter?" "I can draw whoever you want." The woman felt an invisible hoop with, gave her throat with. "Children." Aaliyah, without raising her head, suggested, "Then I'll draw myself." "You can, of course you can." Betty again barely restrained the urge to clasp that poor girl to herself. Her heart overflowed with unspent maternal love, and she was ready to share that feeling with the child. But there was a quiet creak of the door behind her. Betty turned around and saw the owner's aunt. It was an elderly woman who had not greeted her very welcomingly, and she tried not to catch her eye too much. And now Adriana was drilling her with her little eyes. "What do you do?" Vanessa grabbed her drawings. "Grandma Adriana, look what I drew. This is the house I will live in later when I am well. And this is my dog. She looks like a typhoon, though." The old woman made an effort, and a strange smile appeared on her face. "She does. And the one you pictured." Adriana reached for the second drawing. Vanessa began to cheerfully explain it to Betty. "She's kind, like a wizard. And I drew her beautiful." The old lady's inquisitive gaze lowered again at Betty to look like the original. Only sometimes even wizards forget that sick girls need to conserve their strength. Adriana headed for the door, and Betty was ready to fall through the cellular floor. She realized that the old lady was not happy with her and was very afraid that she would tell her master everything. "Vanessa, your grandmother is right. You should get some rest." "Girl, I'm not tired at all. I want to paint the sea some more. Daddy said that when I'm well enough, we'll go to the sea with him. I'll ask him to take you too, because you're good." Betty made the girl drink the medicine and then put her to bed. "You rest for a while, and then you and I will go out. We'll take a walk in the garden." Betty slipped out the door, but almost screamed in surprise when she bumped into Adriana. She realized that the old woman had been eavesdropping. In truth, the older woman was not the least bit embarrassed. "Betty, come into the kitchen. I have something to talk to you about." The strange behavior of this woman, as well as her manner of speaking even on the first day, caused surprise. It had been 2 months, and Betty was still not used to the peculiarities of the inhabitants of the house. Nothing. But she kept all her emotions to herself, as she treasured the job very much. More recently, there was another circumstance of reluctance to part with Vanessa. Betty did not understand why she was drawn to this girl, but it certainly wasn't pity. With those thoughts in mind, she followed Adriana. The table in the kitchen was set for 2. The old woman noticed the surprised look on her face and said, "I'm a living person too, and I'd like to have a word with someone. Don't be shy. Sit close to the table. We'll drink tea and talk." Betty timidly asked if I could help you. "Why?" "I'm all set. Why was I standing at the door, waiting for your class to finish?" "You used to be a teacher." Betty answered honestly. "Yes, I was, but it was a long time ago. I have very little experience." "Not even a year." Adriana shook her gray head. "I didn't earn my pension either. I spent most of my life with my brother. But I never made my own nest. I was married for only 3 years, then I closed my head and he left me. He found someone else, but it seems so was God-pleasing." The old woman poured tea into cups and sat down opposite Betty. "I couldn't leave Yannick alone. It's our custom to help the younger ones in the family. And Jan was the youngest. We're from a remote village ourselves. Our parents dug in the earth all their lives, and we were supposed to continue their work. But I didn't want to. He was different when we were growing up. He liked to stand out. His father beat him a lot, but he never got the bad temper out of him. When she graduated from high school, his father wanted him to join his brigade. But it didn't work out. His brother escaped through the window at night. My father almost died of anger. She shouted at the whole village that she would kill him with her own hands, but he didn't keep his word. When she found out that her son was studying at the institute, she and his mom went to the city every month with full descendants and then boasted, "Say, we have such a smart son who is going to become a scientist." Betty listened in silence, and the old woman suddenly realized, "You're probably not interested." "On the contrary, I'm very interested." "And what happened to your brother Adriana?" she shrieked. "Life is like a fairy tale. The beginning is exciting, it seems, then either boredom or misfortune. Nothing ever happened for us. My brother didn't tell me much about his business, so I don't know how he got rich so fast. But it's true what they say, money spoils people. I got angry too. He ruined his wife with his own hands. Everything was wrong for him. Everything was wrong for him. He calmed down a little when Eugene was born. And then she was gone. She died. And Eugene was left without a mom. And now Vanessa was just like him." Betty exclaimed in horror that her mother was dead too. The old woman crossed herself. "Lord have mercy. She's alive, as far as I know, but she's not much of a mother." Adriana looked warily at the door and then whispered, "I'd love to tell you everything in detail, but Eugene doesn't allow Vanessa to change her mother's name in this house. It was an unhappy love affair. She left him with her daughter and went to Europe." The front door slammed, and Adriana fussed all about the peace. "The landlord's here. He doesn't like to be idle in his house. He's a bully in his office and here too. Even Vanessa gets a lot of abuse from him." Betty hurried to her room. She had only seen Grimes a few times in the entire 2 months. He had only talked to her on the first day, and that conversation had lasted no more than 2 minutes. The businessman asked about her marital status, checked her passport, and did not even look at her diploma. After these obligatory actions, he voiced the condition: "Betty, I trust you the most valuable thing, my daughter, so I hope for your decency. Of course, more from you I have no right to demand, but I will be grateful if a particle of warmth. Give it to my little girl. It's very important to her right now." Betty wanted to assure her master that she would do her best to care for his daughter. But Grimes left without letting her speak. He always returned home late at night, when Vanessa was already asleep. Betty therefore had no opportunity to tell him how the girl had spent the day. But she guessed that the ubiquitous Adriana reported everything to him daily as well. Of course, Betty was a little uncomfortable being a servant. But today, for the first time in 2 months, she felt real joy as she watched the gardener trimming the bushes from the window. Betty thought it's true what they say, love works wonders. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure the baby gets better. And so she admitted to herself that she loved someone else's little girl. But this discovery did not frighten her, it only gave her confidence. She would try to stay in that house. And not at all because she had nowhere to live with nothing to live on. She really wanted Vanessa to learn to smile, not because she was asked to, but just to smile at the sun, at the birds, at the new day. Betty was well aware that it was not going to be easy ex their housekeepers with their strange notions. A mother who was missing a father who was always at work, and nothing contributed to making Vanessa happy. Even Adriana, who seemed to genuinely love the girl, seemed to be trying hard to hide her emotions. It's unclear why. Adriana didn't have time to put the table in order. Grimes caught his aunt on a hot broom. This one was quietly indulging in tea and probably played a couple of games. The old woman didn't even raise an eyebrow. She had long ago learned that the best defense is a surprise attack. "Why are you back so early? Or did you get bored with work and want some female companionship? Why don't you look for other female companionship? What's so interesting about socializing with an old woman?" The man laughed, naturally, a relative in Adriana's arms. "You know how to get off an unpleasant subject. Judging by your reaction, I hit the mark. And how was the operation to recruit our nurse?" The old woman's lips tightened in a way that indicated her extreme displeasure. Nephew could be too perceptive when he didn't need to be, but when it was necessary to consider this Valeria, it was as if he had lost his mind. But it's also impossible to be in the same house and not notice each other. So you decided to be the first to step up. I hope Betty appreciated your good intentions. or did you find a way in?" The woman had already cleared the cups and plates from the table. "Eugene, stop talking to me like I'm an unintelligent child. I am almost twice your age and I demand respect." The man realized that he had said too much and wanted to enclose the aunt in his arms again. But she came back. "Sit down at the table, I'll feed you, because you with your work forget to eat normally, but as if you were 18. And you are far from 18 and it's high time to eat, right? And you're just joking around." "Yes, Comrade Marshall." Grimes jokingly saluted his aunt and sat down at the table. Adriana immediately forgot about all the offenses and put a bowl of soup in front of her nephew. No matter how old he was for her, he was always her nephew, a boy whom life had wronged more than once. "Eat before it gets cold. Betty and I just had tea. She doesn't leave her room all day, so I decided to give her a treat." Adriana hesitated and fell silent. She was skeptical that her nephew had found a nurse for Allie so quickly. How could she entrust her girl to an untested person? And Eugene hadn't even made any inquiries. But after a few days, seeing how Betty did not leave Golly, Adriana softened. But she didn't want to give up so quickly. "And what did you two talk about, if it's no secret?" "Oh, just a little bit of everything. She's a hothead too, and she's had a lot to drink. Her husband died and left her with a lot of debts. She had to sell everything, even her apartment. You know, I realized one thing. The better a person is, the harder life beats him. That's the pattern." Eugene with appetite flew away. Soups only occasionally gave in to Auntie. Life is such a thing that a man does not know where it will give him in 5 days. You don't expect anything like that. But then one day it's here. The man spoke in such a tone that the aunt unmistakably guessed that something had happened today that made her nephew change his habits. Adriana lowered herself into a chair and, in a heartfelt voice, asked Eddie, "Check, what's wrong? Or did she show up again?" "Adriana, I even crossed myself as if I'd said something bad." And her worst fears were immediately confirmed. Grimes sighed heavily. "Auntie guessed it. I don't know where you got that mind-reading ability, but you could make a living at it. Don't bother asking me questions. Things will settle down a bit, and I'll tell you all about it later. Thanks for the vow." "Adriana, I didn't press for details, just sighed, as long as it was healthy. You're not going anywhere else today." Eugene got up from the table. "No, I want to stay home. Maybe I'll take Vanessa for a walk in the park tonight. Betty was going to get some fresh air with her, too. They arrested her today. Can you admire your daughter's artwork?" The man's revitalized. "Let's see it. That's a positive sign." It wasn't the doctor who said it was advisable to keep Vanessa busy with exciting games or creative activities. Adriana held out the drawings to Vanessa. Grimes' gaze warmed. "Good for you, after all. This is Betty." Vanessa used to draw everything in black and white, but this is such a fountain of colors. "Look, my artist even drew a dog. It looks like a typhoon." The old woman nodded in agreement. "Yes, it does." Eugene shouldn't have given the dog to his hunter friend. Vanessa was very worried. Maybe that's what gave her the disease. All the time Vanessa was sick, Adriana tried to find the cause. It seemed to her that there was a reason, and it had to be found and eliminated. Then Vanessa would get better right away. You and I have discussed this matter many times. Let's not go back to it. Grimes returned to his usual demeanor. He looked at his aunt with irritation and added that Betty, I will give her a bonus for her special diligence. Adriana muttered slowly, "You can't measure love and care with money. You should know that." Eugene looked at his aunt with an absent look and headed for his office. Today's meeting was unexpected and awakened in his soul not the most pleasant memories. Memories of things he would rather forget. Despite his tough temper, Martin allowed his only son a lot of things. If his wife and servants he kept in a black body, then Eugene could do anything that he occasionally gets into his head. After the tragic death of his wife, Millionaire especially succeeded in indulging his son. Any whim Eugene fulfilled immediately. It was worth only the appearance of a cell phone, like a son. Nothing was at the disposal of the coolest device. Eugene wanted to join the biker culture. Please get a bike with various technical contraptions. On the sole heir's coming of age. Martin celebrated with pomp, organizing a real show in his recently arranged country residence. The guests were entertained by famous entertainers, and the final part of the program was a fireworks display, equal in power and duration of fireworks on public holidays. The gifts also corresponded to the status of the event. But the main present, a sports car, Eugene received from his father. Like many newly emerged from the golden eggs, Eugene was fond of extreme entertainment. At night, he raced around the city on a brand new car together with a group of the same young inadequates. Several times the police arrested him for violations, but usually he spent no more than half an hour in the police station because his father's name had magical powers. But one day it stopped working. Then Eugene and his two buddies got drunk in a bar, and he was in a desperate need of fun. But on the night, streets almost ended in tragedy when one of the racers beat up a woman on a pedestrian. But thank God, the unfortunate got away with a closed fracture of the tibia and a strong fright. The perpetrators of the accident did not manage to escape and were taken to the police station. Adrenaline mixed with booze, still splashing in the veins of guys who openly threatened the guards of order. Eugene's making faces at the officer on 2B2. Listen, now my father will come and build you all up. You're all flying out of here like a champagne cork. In the midst of such a performance, a drunken man showed up. When Eugene saw his father, he yelled, "Oh ho ho ho. Here comes Mr. Grimes. Get ready, you shameful cops." Martin whispered something to the officer on duty, and he opened the monkey house. It was like something out of a thrilling movie. Senior Grimes took his offspring out of the cage and beat him in public with a belt. As he did so, he loudly repeated, "Better late than never." Eugene tried to dodge the blows, but the natural leather belt hit him again and again. The most frustrating thing was that his helplessness was laughed at not only by the department staff, but also by his friends, with whom he had been nightmarishing the city together for many months. Through much persuasion, Nothing to the elder and the fathers of other underdogs managed to settle the case. For a long time, the victim did not want to give in, but after a solid monetary compensation, all the same gave in. In order to teach his wayward son a lesson, Martin forced his son to act as a negotiator. Every day after school, the boy visited his wounded aunt in the hospital. He had to spend his pocket money on apples and oranges. Nina was a little shy at first, but did not refuse the guests. When I started to feel better, it turned out that she and her husband had been planning to renovate their apartment for a long time. But all lacked money, pocket money. A student for such a global event was clearly not enough, and Eugene had to bow at the feet of his father. Martin, with new dental implants, unbuckled the necessary amount, but he warned his son, "Let's finish the drudgery with this aunt. Otherwise, she'll be pulling money from us till the end. Let them give a receipt that we compensated her for the moral and physical damage." During the next visit, Eugene rolled out this condition, which brought Gennady to a state of tetanus. During this epic scene, Clara, the minor daughter of the victim, was present. She agreed to all the separation help. "Mom is dying." Of course, the entire staff also ran to this cry and wildly, rudely shoved her out of the ward. At first, the guy was even happy about this turn. Now that evil aunt would get off our backs. But Nina was not one of those who forget about unpaid debts. She showed up at the luxury village in a cab. She couldn't walk with confidence yet, so she leaned on crutches. The guards at first did not want to let the visitors in, but she began to scandalize. The elder Grimes had to resolve the conflict himself. As he approached the gate, Nina sang pitifully, "Martin, I thought you were a decent man. It's because of your son. I almost became an invalid. How can such callous people represent other people's interests?" Eugene's father immediately realized that this woman was extorting money. There was an election campaign looming, and Grimes' candidacy was on the list of people to prevent unwanted hospital action. He wrote her a check, but took a receipt. That was the end of the unpleasant story, and they soon forgot all about it. But a few years passed, and both of them had to remember the old conflict. "I had always had good health, but over the years it began to fail more and more often." Fearing a sudden departure, the man began to gradually hand over the business to his son. Eugene from childhood was accustomed to the idea that he was obliged to continue his father's business, so he quickly enough joined the business and even began to carry out some useful changes. The father was pleased with his son. The only thing that upset him was the prolonged bachelor period in his son's life. Many times he started a conversation with him on this topic, but each time wildly resolute cut him off. "Dad, and I'll decide when I get married. I'm not ripe for this step. When will you?" When the sand comes out of the same place. I realized I didn't have the power I used to have, but he had to accept reality. Sometimes he still dared to talk to his sister about his son's fate. Several times they tried to introduce the boy to promising brides from good families, but Eugene immediately recognized their intentions. You won't get anywhere with those methods, even if you get a good girl. The mere realization that it was a setup would turn me away from her. Since there was no other method of marrying my son, Grimes continued to try to introduce him to the daughters of his business partners. Knowing his father's intentions, Eugene simply stopped coming to his father's house. After graduating from the institute, he settled in an old city apartment. On that winter evening, shortly before New Year's Eve, he was also relaxing at home in the company of friends. But Adriana Edie called. "We're in trouble. They took your father to the hospital badly. He collapsed during dinner. He was sitting there eating roast lamb, and suddenly he started falling over on his side. I was so frightened that I almost had a heart attack myself." Auntie said all this at once and asked Eugene to come as soon as possible. The young man rushed straight to the hospital, where he had a hard time getting permission to go to his father's room. The doctor tried to reassure him. "It's not a big deal yet. Your father's blood pressure spiked. His blood sugar's higher than normal, too. But it's stabilized now. He's resting." Eugene insisted. "I want to see my father. I need to make sure he's okay." The doctor gave in. He asked a young nurse to escort this gentleman to the 8th. The girl pouted her plump lips prettily. "Liam, if you mean Grimes, he's in our room. You told me to put him there." The doctor touched his pocket and then said, "Thank you, Clara, for the tip." Everything's slipping out of my head as I go along. I can't keep anything straight. The nurse smiled with the same charming smile and looked at Eugene. "Come on, I'll walk you out." Although the room for the selected patients was not luxurious. But here was everything necessary for a comfortable life, and they had a thing slept soundly, and his son did not wake him. The nurse touched the visitor's arm. "Well, made sure that your dad is all right?" "Yes, thank you." He hurried to the exit, but the girl stopped him. "Eugene, don't you recognize me?" Did he shake his head? "I didn't." "Have we met before?" A matchless smile lit up the girl's face again. "Yes, but that was over 8 years ago. We met, but at a different hospital. I came to see my mom." A hunch burned my brain. "So you were the one who was broadcasting to the whole ward. You almost got me thrown in jail." It was said by a young man with a sense of humor, and Clara immediately laughed. I was just a little girl then, and I was very scared for my mom. So I started screaming like crazy. "And how is your mother now? How is her leg?" The girl was first surprised at what leg, but then remembered the circumstances of the incident in the hospital. "You mean the fracture?" Mom had long since forgotten about it. Eugene thought about the fictitious money. Probably she hadn't forgotten. But the young man did not speak out loud about it, because she considered it unethical in such a situation. Martin was in the hospital for almost a month. Eugene visited him every day, and every day saw Valeria in his father's room. This girl completely conquered the elder Grimes, who winking said to his son Eugene, "Look, what a girl is not the main doctor introduced her by a great favor. And thank him for this, because Clara brightens up my boring existence. Such an attentive, affectionate girl with no attitude. I wish I had a daughter-in-law like that." This statement was more than a hint. But in response, the boy only smiled. He did not want to admit to his father that this girl immediately fell into his heart. Eugene gave Clara gorgeous bouquets. Once he invited her to an expensive restaurant. After a romantic evening, they became very close in the truest sense of the word. But about the rapid development of their romance, sick father did not know. Therefore, Martin was very surprised when, after being discharged from the hospital, His son told him that he was going to get married. "Where did you find a bride?" "You were in my room half the day." Eugene replied cheerfully, "That's where I found my chosen one. By the way, it happened with your direct participation." The elder Grimes was pleased with his son, but Adriana did not like her nephew's bride. Without shyness, she declared to Eugene that's Clara, the dark horse. "Take a closer look at her. She's a con artist." Eugene then resented Auntie. "What is it with you and your branding?" Clara is respected at work. The sick people also speak very well of her. The aunt did not argue with him, but remained in her opinion. She reminded him of her warning later when Clara sneaked out of her husband's house, leaving her 6-month-old daughter with him. Eugene went off his feet looking for his young wife, but Lara was nowhere to be found. She had left her job at the hospital right after the wedding, and her friends had no idea where she might have gone. The girl's mother was also completely in the dark. However, Nina did not miss the opportunity to blame Eugene for everything. Wives don't run away from good husbands. If anything happens to the young girl, it's your fault. But Eugene was not confused and answered the hated woman in the same manner. "Your daughter must have forgotten that she is also a mother. If she makes herself known, remind her of that fact, and be sure to tell her that I will sue. A woman like that doesn't deserve to be called a mother." That warning had an effect, and literally the next day Nina, as usual, jumped in a cab to the house with some fanatical triumph. She told me Clara had gone to visit relatives in Europe. "She called me yesterday from Brooklyn and told me she was going to live and study there." Eugene remarked sarcastically that you had never told me before that you had relatives in Europe. The woman blushed, and he realized she was lying. There was no point in talking to her further, so Eugene closed the gate in front of her. Nina came to her senses and shouted after him, "Yes, my daughter has a man who is willing to do a lot for her. He is not as stingy as you, Eugene, and she'll definitely take her daughter. As soon as she gets settled, she will come and take Vanessa to Europe." Eugene decided not to respond to this loud statement. That same day, he asked his lawyers to start the process for divorce and termination of Clara's parental rights. The next few months were filled with threats and curses. Clara would call him regularly once a week and talk trash. Like, "You'll regret doing this to me," when he asked for clarification on what she was putting him down for. Ex-wife was sending curses at him. It all boomeranged back on you when he stopped returning her calls. Letters started pouring in. Eugene had to take another case against his wife. After that, Clara calmed down. There was no news of her for 3 years. And then he learned that his ex-wife had gotten into some unpleasant trouble in Europe. Another 1.5 years passed, and Clara reminded him of herself with a phone call. She tearfully asked him, "Eugene, to turn to no one else for the sake of our little girl. Help me. I promise I'll pay you back." Not so much out of pity as to get rid of her, Edward transferred a small sum of money to his ex-wife's account. Surprisingly, Clara thanked him. However, as soon as he asked her where she was and what she was doing, the connection was cut off. When Vanessa grew up and started to ask about her mom, Eugene told her, "Your mom went camping in the mountains and got lost there." The aunt thought this was the right explanation. Let the child hope that mom would return one day. Only Martin could not get over his son's family drama. He blamed himself for not being able to see behind the beautiful appearance of the rotten soul of the girl. But it was possible that the deterioration of his health was due to entirely different reasons. The man was driving when he felt sick. He still managed to pull over to the side of the road so as not to create an obstacle on a busy highway. When concerned people tried to find out why the SUV was standing motionless for so long, the driver was already without signs of life. After the lavish funeral of the rich businessman, Eugene became the full owner of his father's company and his property. He led a rather modest lifestyle and contented himself with the company of Aunt. All the other servants young Grimes fired Adriana thought this decision was right. Why should we waste money? I run my own household. And to her credit, she was good at it, despite her age. Eugene appreciated his aunt's help very much and was more afraid of losing her than anything else in the world. So he did not tell her the details of today's meeting with his ex-wife. Clara was waiting for him at the entrance to the office. She had changed a lot, and again. Again, he did not immediately recognize her. "You've made it a tradition not to recognize me," the woman said with obvious bitterness. "That's because I don't have time to get used to you. You appear suddenly and disappear suddenly." He headed for the door, signaling that the conversation was over. But Clara hurried after him. "Eugene, I'm going to be a minute. You realize I'm here for a reason." "I do. What do you want from me this time?" "I want to see my daughter. I heard a rumor that she's sick." Eugene interrupted the woman. "You must have forgotten that you've been deprived of parental rights since the trial. And where's all this concern coming from all of a sudden? I will never believe that in your stone heart moved what is called conscience." Clara, often with eyes as if ready to cry. But this technique Eugene had learned well during their short married life. "Clara, stop acting out. It doesn't work on me. Tell me what you want and go away." She didn't have to beg and looked him in the eye. "Give me the money. I'm left on the dole. My common-law husband left me. What about Europe? It's an endless paradise." Clara lowered her eyes. "I was deported. I won't tell you why. It's not interesting to know before Siberia." "You guessed it. Your personal life. Clara hasn't interested me for a long time, and I'll give you the money for the last time. You hear me? For the last time, leave me and Vanessa alone. It's better for us and for you." He had all the cash. What was in his wallet? But Clara grinned and said, "You're not getting off that cheap. You owe me a living because you have our daughter." Eugene had to give his ex-wife a promise that he would give her the required amount. He took a long time to recover in his office and then wrote a check and invited favors. "Maria, I have a very delicate request. Make a card for these personal details through our bank." Favors asked, "Who should I give it to later?" Grimes handed her a notepad on a sheet of paper. "You put it at this address here, but you show it to me first. I have to transfer money from my account." Maria wasn't used to asking questions of the chief, but she'd had to run similar errands before, with the door of the chief's office closed. She whispered again this brew was pulling money out of him. The young secretary jumped up. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What did you say? Did you think you were working?" Favors I couldn't wait to call Betty and ask how she was doing. But since she was in the middle of a workday, she decided to do it later. That evening, Betty was surprised when the owner knocked on her door warily. She thought Adriana had decided to cement their relationship with another cup of tea. But it was Eugene who entered the room. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Betty, but Auntie told me in confidence that you and Vanessa were going for a walk." The woman managed not to be awkward and as kindly as possible replied, "Actually, there is no secret." All the more the attending physician advised her to be in the air more often. Again, the positive effects of a regular walk should not be underestimated. Vanessa began to revive little by little. "Her drawings are becoming more and more brightly colored. Yes, I had the good fortune to see her work today, and I want to thank you for your sensitivity to my girl. I'd like to give you a raise. You shouldn't. I don't work in your house for the money, although it's important to me now. Vanessa's health is far more important, and I don't care about your status." The man was embarrassed and hurried out of the room. Betty threw a light shawl over her shoulders and knocked on the girl's room. "Ale, you are ready." From behind came a ringing laugh. "I thought you wouldn't guess I was hiding." Vanessa clutched the teddy bear to her chest. "I decided to take the crowd for a walk, because he's been sitting at home for a long time." The nurse agreed. "Good, let the teddy bear keep us company. But you still need a little greenhouse. It's a breeze outside. You know you're not supposed to be molested." Vanessa's piled up in her sweater. "I'll be hot. No one wears warm clothes in the summer." Wrong answer. "See, I took a shawl too, 'cause I'm afraid it's drafty." There was a cheerful voice nearby. "Grimes, Betty, I'll be taken for a walk. You see, I'd even put on a warm sweater, because I am also afraid of drought since childhood." Vanessa banned with delight. "Daddy, you are healthy with us too." Betty did not notice the appearance of the master and was confused. Taking advantage of the moment, Valia ran for coats and returned to the place of gathering. "I'm ready. Let's go." Adults slowly passed Olzia along the shrubs and flower beds' unusual shapes. Vanessa was distracted every minute by birds and various insects. "Daddy, look, what a beautiful butterfly." "Oh, and there are such funny flower beds," Eugene said sadly. "I must have missed something." My daughter acts as if it's the first time she's ever seen this wildlife. Betty tried to control the feeling of awkwardness she felt in the presence of this man. The main thing to notice in time is that a child of any age needs attention and love. And sick children are especially vulnerable. The man waved his hand in frustration. "You're absolutely right. Like my father, business has always come first for me. My husband was also obsessed, but he never achieved anything in life. I haven't told you about you. It's a pity that good people are often unlucky." Betty laughed. "Eugene, that's a dangerous theory. Everyone strives for success, but that doesn't mean you have to be a scoundrel to achieve your goal. I'm going in the wrong direction here. You know, I've had a lot of bad luck in my life. So by my flawed theory, I can safely categorize myself as a good person. That's comforting." For more than an hour, they walked in the park, which was created by the hands of Eugene's father. The man told the nurse about the adventures of his youth. He mentioned the time when his father had whipped him in public with a belt. Betty laughed heartily and also told funny stories from her life. By the end of the walk, the awkwardness was completely gone, and she gladly accepted nothing's offer to visit the zoo with Vanessa on her day off. I asked the attending physician, and he gave the go-ahead. He advised me to go at a time when the menagerie would be less crowded. Suddenly, Vanessa spoke up. "Daddy's dog kennel is like a menagerie, too. I know we can't have a puppy yet, but at least we can see it." There was so much hope in the girl's eyes that her father didn't dare to refuse her. "All right, we'll take everything to the shelter and even plant four-legged pets. All the good stuff." Alex immediately caught on to the idea. "Daddy, can Betty and I go to the store tomorrow and get food for the dogs?" "You got it. Mike will drive you there and back." Betty remembered that her car engine was acting up and timidly asked, "Oh, and I'm going to go to the car service too." "May I, Eugene?" "Sure, Betty. Then you'll have to bring along our helpful Aunt Adriana for the full package." The next day, the team started packing for the camping trip early in the morning. Adriana fussed most of all slowly. "Don't forget your mask. Otherwise, you can get an infection at the store and put on a blouse too." The elderly woman gave a similar instruction to the caregiver and the driver, so the gathering turned out to be long. Adriana enjoyed commanding so much that she, as a team, reached the city, offered a rational option to Betty. "In order to save time, you'll go to your workshop and we'll go to the store lounge. Then we'll call and arrange where to meet." Betty didn't agree at first because she was worried. But our faithful aunt insisted. "I'm not the enemy of my granddaughter. We can leave her in the car with Mike, and we'll go to the store and get what we need." Vanessa decided to make her own terms. "I'll agree to stay in the car if you take me to the dolphins later." A small dolphinarium not so long ago opened in the regional center, and many parents with children were eager to check in there. The adults found nothing dangerous in the girl's desire and agreed. The car service workers quickly fixed the problems in Betty's car, and she dialed the driver's number. Mike said that they had already managed to buy guests for the kennel and was currently at the dolphinarium. The phone was snatched from Michael by Adriana. "Betty, you can go straight home. There's no need to go back and forth, wasting gasoline. We'll be leaving in about half an hour too." Vanessa made friends with a dolphin. You have no idea how excited she is. Betty had only once had experience with these charming animals, so it was easy for her to imagine the emotions of a sick girl. With such positive thoughts, the woman settled into her and headed back to the Grimes residence. She walked to her room and was just about to change her clothes when a suspicious noise was heard outside the window. Betty swung open the casement and peered out through the bushes. Something was hurting, and the woman asked fearfully who was there. "Come out, or I'll call the guards now." There was another rustle, and then there was a woman's voice. "You don't need to call anyone. I'll leave when I see fit." A woman of about 30 years old came out of her hiding place, and with an unkind look, leaving Betty, asked, "Who are you?" The nurse answered exactly the same question I want to ask you. "Who are you, and how did you sneak into someone else's territory?" The stranger grinned and pointed her hand to the sky. "I'm one of those aliens only recently landed." Betty picked up the phone, much to the stranger's consternation. "I was just kidding. It's just that the township said you needed an employee." "No, you were misinformed." "Wait, I'll walk you to the gate." Just then Grimes's car pulled up, and the woman disappeared as quickly as if she could actually move through space without the use of special equipment. Just in case, Betty went outside and examined the shrubbery where the stranger was hiding. But she found nothing suspicious there. Grimes was surprised at the nurse's strange behavior. "Betty, did you lose something?" Did the wave of embarrassment wash over her again? "No, I just thought there was something shiny." It happens. It's called optical deception. In the summertime, especially before sunset, you often see glints like that. But a closer look reveals that there is nothing there. This is how the rays of the setting sun play, so your worries are unfounded. Why don't you tell me about your trip to the city? Betty talked briefly about the trip. "I didn't have to go out. I stayed at the car dealership. Vanessa and your aunt went to the dolphinarium. They should be arriving any minute." Betty remembered the mysterious visitors when the owner had already disappeared into his office. Soon the merry company returned from their walk, and Betty rushed out to greet them. She was very anxious for the girl, who was taking her first walk for so long in months. Vanessa looked tired, but happy. And after dinner she went to bed herself. Eugene, however, was eager to continue the evening. He knocked gently again. "Betty, I haven't bored you yet." "No, not at all. Ollie is asleep. She had so much fun at the dolphinarium." "Are you tired too?" No. Then I suggest we continue this evening." She caught his gaze and felt herself blush in the man's eyes. Betty saw something more than the usual interest, although she realized that one must not cross the line that always exists between employer and mere employee. The desire to briefly feel happy again won out. It had been a terrific evening. The two of them admired the crimson sunset, which, after sunset, gently descended on the surface of the river water and floated into unknown distances. Grimes put his arm around her shoulders and said dreamily, "Perhaps such moments are the most precious in life, because they make a person happy. Betty, you won't believe it, but I have never experienced what is called happiness. I'm approaching 40 years old. I, too, can count on my fingers the days I felt happy. Eugene, we should get back. I'm a little worried about Vanessa. Adriana will be worried, too. Thank you for this wonderful evening." Grimes, like a gallant gentleman, kissed her hand, which came as a complete surprise. That night, she couldn't sleep for a long time. The businessman's kiss burned on her hand with fire, and his words about simple human happiness sounded in her ears. The news that the businessman Grimes marries a simple nurse quickly traveled not only the elite village, but also spread throughout the city. Representatives of the secular community were openly indignant, believing that such a status of a young man should not connect himself with the bonds of marriage with a housekeeper. But the commoners of the maid's estate treated this event with restraint. The guards and Misha's driver whispered quietly, expecting that they would soon be brought changes. Adriana didn't see anything wrong. When Anna dropped by her for a moment to find out more about everything, she philosophically remarked that fate itself guides a man. It is she who forces him to make choices, so it is useless to resist her. Of course, I don't know how it will be, but Betty is a good woman. Anna had a different opinion on the matter. Your Eugene could have chosen a richer, younger woman. This Betty is about 40 years old, and they looked at her passport. What does it matter how old she is? It's not age that counts in a family, it's understanding. Eugene has changed a lot. Lately, I don't even recognize him. He became interested not only in his business, but also in his home affairs. And he started coming home on time. Vanessa, how does she feel about having a stepmother soon? Adriana shouted at her former companion. Don't you dare say such words here. After all, it is only thanks to Betty that the girl has made a recovery. Although the doctors warn that the disease can still bring surprises. But we all hope for the best. Betty hoped for the best. But she was panic-stricken that everything would suddenly disappear one day and she'd be left with nothing. One day she told Marianne, with whom they had become friends in recent months, about her concerns. She was shocked by her confession. Betty, you can't do that. Don't you realize you're setting yourself up for negativity? You're a smart woman and you have an education, right? Probably took a psychology course at your pedagogical school. But you yourself realize that theory is very far from life. It's just that you're used to waiting for a trick from life. You need to get rid of that. Do you want me to take you to a specialist to set your mind right? Oh no, I'll do it myself. I just can't get used to my new role. Well, you get used to a good thing. You can still enjoy your happiness. Maybe even give Ganna a son. Maria, I've already passed all my lost love, and I'll give it to Vanessa. You won't believe it. I'm so used to this girl, and it's been less than a year. Maria was thinking of telling her friend to watch out for Eugene's ex-wife. Clara, contrary to her promise, continued to pursue Grimes and the man, to avoid scandal, transferred large sums of money to her account. This secret she revealed to Jenna, who was sincerely worried about the fate of their mutual friend. Jenna, imagine, It's on the Hulk does not give anything a break. Previously, she rarely appeared, but now strictly once a quarter requires money. Oh, we should warn Urka not to get into a puddle again. She won't suffer a catastrophe a second time. I wanted to tell her before the wedding, but I changed my mind at the last minute. She's so happy. I don't want to ruin her hopes. Both cronies attended the wedding, which was held in one of the best restaurants in the city. But Grimes hadn't changed since the ceremony. He still as carefully treated her and often gave flowers. In the fall, doctors allowed Vanessa to go to school. Betty took the girl to her and picked her up in the afternoon. One day she was a little late and saw Lou being led by the hand by a strange woman. She rushed forward and recognized the strangers. She recognized the stranger as the occasional summer visitor who hid in the bushes under her room window. Seeing her, Allie shouted, "Betty, this auntie told me she was my real mom." It's true. Apparently, the girl had experienced great excitement and cried. Betty held her close to her. "Calm down, my good aunt was joking." The stranger grinned insolently. "I see the nurse, you're making progress, has not only managed to get into bed with my husband, but has also turned my daughter against me." Just as quietly, Betty asked, "This is the second time I've seen you, and I have no desire to meet you. Once again, please leave our family alone." Vanessa was just beginning to come to life. For her, any stress is dangerous. The woman unceremoniously interrupted her. "I decided to cover for my child." "No, dearie, that's not going to work for you, is it? What do you want justice for?" "I want my daughter back. I can't live without her." "I think you should take it up with Eugene, not on the street." Vanessa heard everything and cried even harder. "You're lying. You are not a mom, all moms are kind, but you are evil like a witch." The woman tried to grab the girl's arm again, but Vanessa kicked her in the knee with her foot. The kick was painful, and Clara grabbed her leg. "That's quite a family you got there. Wait till you see what kind of paradise I've got in store for you." Betty ran to Vanessa's car, barely keeping up with her. The girl was not ready for such physical exertion and began to choke. Betty had to take her in her arms to get her out of the place as quickly as possible. In the car, the girl was breathing. "Betty, are you going to tell Daddy?" Without turning around, she replied, "Sure, I will. I also think I should write a report on this person. Maybe then the relevant authorities will take an interest in her, and she will lose the desire to poison people's lives." Eugene was shocked when Betty told him about the outrageous incident near the school. He told his wife about his first failed marriage and how he was being stalked by his ex-wife. "It's my own fault for letting it happen. But I thought she'd get bored one day. I mean, she's the kind of girl who'd do anything." "You should have let her go right away, huh? You made a big mistake giving her the money." "I realize that now, but I don't know how to stop it." "Eugene, are you afraid of publicity? But you had nothing to do with it. Clara has promised to tell the world everything she knows about me, and as you know, everyone has things they don't want to make public." They spent the whole evening discussing what could be done. In the end, Adriana exclaimed, "You know, to me, the whole problem is not worth it. Clara is trash, and she needs to be treated like crap. What are you afraid of? Eugene? So they find out something about you and let you run your own business. You don't depend on anyone. And if you keep giving her money, she'll just bankrupt you. Of course, you have to keep Vanessa away." Make it so it doesn't bother her anymore. It's decided that Betty and Vanessa will go to the seaside. While Eugene dealt with his ex-wife, Vanessa stood on the beach barefoot. And every time a quiet wave reached her feet, smiling at how nice it was here, Betty smiled. Do you like it? It's only too bad Daddy couldn't come with us. But Daddy has a lot of things to do. He will definitely come with us next time. She put her arm around the girl's shoulders and they looked at the sunset for a long time. But what? Sleep tonight and tomorrow morning at the sea from the very morning. Vanessa nodded. Eugene called every evening and told her the news. Yes, Betty watched the news herself. Clara had been interviewed several times, trying to sling mud at Eugene. But they had thought this point out in advance, and the reporters asked questions that were uncomfortable for Clara. The apogee was the trial, which finally took place over Clara. She was facing several charges at once, and Eugene offered to disappear from the city, from their lives, in exchange for her freedom. She had no choice to accept. But when she turned to her ex-husband, he hissed, "You're going to regret this a lot." And he, frankly, already regretted it. Realized that the respite, if there will be, then a small, but he was sure he wouldn't get any more of his ex-wife's money. There were only 3 days left till the end of the vacation, when in the evening Eugene didn't call. Betty tried to dial herself, but her husband's phone was out of range. She didn't call Adriana, sensibly reasoning that if anything had happened, her husband's aunt would have called her immediately in the morning. The phone was still unavailable. Betty dialed over and over again, but the robotic voice kept repeating the same thing. She was about to call Arcadia. Vanessa walked into the room. "Betty, let's just go for a walk today. I saw the market there. We should definitely buy some souvenirs for Adriana's dad and grandmother." There must have been something on Betty's face that made the girl ask worriedly what was wrong. "No, honey, it's okay, don't worry. Sure, we'll go and buy everyone souvenirs." They walked until lunchtime. Then, when the heat got too much, they went back to the room to rest. Betty could hardly contain her excitement and decided that she would call Adriana Millionaire right away. "And where are you blown away?" Betty and Vanessa stopped like a dumbfounded man. In their suite, Eugene was sprawled out on the couch. Daddy, Eugene. Vanessa hung onto her father. Betty too, though honestly, she was ready to nail him. I mean, how can you have surprises like that? "I thought I'd surprise my girls. The girls have been out all day. I even got some sleep, and I missed you guys." With a glare from her husband, Betty realized his boredom was comprehensive. She was embarrassed, even though he and his wife were also on their last night out. Before they left, they walked along the beach, with Vanessa running ahead trying to find the prettiest shell. I look at her, and I can't believe it. Only 2 years ago, she never talked about anything but the fact that she was going to die. And I wanted to die myself. Do you realize, Betty, that you got us all out? Betty smiled. I could say the same about myself. I didn't want to live until I found you. Eugene raised his hand, suggesting we go to a local restaurant. Let's celebrate both our departure and the fact that we found each other so well. Betty laughingly agreed. It took Vanessa about 10 minutes to convince her to take only a few shells and empty her pockets. For the first month after we returned, Betty even jumped up at night. She was so afraid of Clara showing up again that she was unwilling to settle down. Eugene, looking at his wife's tossing and turning, decided to hire a security guard for his daughter. It was only then that Betty calmed down a bit. Though at first she was just winding up the guard, reminding him how he should guard Vanessa. The girl felt great. Only regular visits to the doctor reminded her of her illness. The examination was quick, though every time before it Betty was worried, so she couldn't eat. "Vanessa, we are going to the doctor tomorrow." The girl grimaced. "Not again, but again. What's the matter with you?" "You know it's necessary so the disease doesn't come back." "Yes, I know." In the morning, Betty woke up with a sore head. She wasn't surprised because it was almost always like this before an examination. Eugene looked at her and shook his head. "Betty, I sometimes forget that Vanessa is not your own daughter. Here, forget it completely." The man pulled her to him. "I'm so grateful to Anna for leaving us at such a good time. If she had stayed, we would never have met you. Betty smiled slyly. I guess we would have met anyway. Vanessa entered the office. The first said hello. The doctor smiled. I see, young lady. You're quite the adult, even without an escort. Vanessa turned around in surprise at the door. Where's Betty? The girl opened the door and immediately saw Betty. She was sitting in a chair, pale as snow, and looking at the doctor in front of her, who looked out along with Vanessa, popping out into the hallway fast to the ceiling. Vanessa watched in horror as Betty was carried down the hallway. Her strength was only enough to dial her father's number. Daddy, we're at the hospital. Betty isn't well. She's being wheeled away on a gurney. Eugene yelled that he was coming. And he passed out. He hadn't driven like that in a long time. Every now and then he heard the honking, but he only pressed the gas pedal to the floor harder. There was only one thought in his head. Just don't let anything happen. I wish it were nothing. Eugene saw his daughter at once. Vanessa looked so lost. Daughter, what happened? Daddy, I don't know. We were talking, and then I went to the study. Daddy, Betty's not going to die. Eugene didn't have time to answer because the doctor stopped next to them. Nobody's going to die. You can pick up your mommy in half an hour. Eugene stood up, looked at him. What's wrong with her? Doctor, please, I'm allowed to tell the whole truth. Vanessa held his hand tightly, as if supporting the doctor, smiled. I wasn't going to hide anything from you. I don't know, your wife took her diagnosis very strangely. I have a feeling she's a little lost. Eugene wanted to shake the doctor, but why say so many unnecessary and superfluous words? You could just name the disease Betty has. And then Eugene would quickly think of what to do next. Apparently the doctor sensed Grimes' mood, so he quickly said your wife is pregnant. Of course, we're a different kind of hospital, but that's something we can determine. Apparently, the look on Eugene's face made the doctor question his adequacy. There's nothing wrong with you. Why do you have a seat? Eugene nodded, sat down, and only then looked at Vanessa. She smiled. Daddy, I'm going to have a brother or sister. Eugene seemed to let go. He jumped up. Vanessa spun around. Yes, can you imagine? We're going to have another Grimes. Vanessa laughed, fighting him off. Before they knew it, Betty walked up to them. She was looking at them and smiling. And she was crying too. Just a little bit, just a little bit. Finally, they noticed her. Eugene carefully set his daughter on the floor and walked over to Betty's wife. She lowered her eyes in embarrassment. I don't know. I wasn't expecting it. I thought I never would. Age, after all. Eugene laughed. What age? Look at you. You're the youngest and most beautiful. Betty, Adriana, Vanessa, and Eugene were waiting for the birth most of all. And she also noticed that Vanessa was not only very worried about her, but also distant in some way. She tried to talk to the girl about it, but Vanessa immediately walked away from the conversation. Betty didn't understand anything. She had hoped so much that they would become real family. But she couldn't find out what had happened and went to the birth with a heavy heart. Vanessa saw her off coldly. Before she got in the car, Betty hugged her. Alice Sunshine. What's wrong? I'm fine. Don't worry. You can't worry right now. I took a step back. It was only now that Betty realized she was jealous and thought about how she would be treated differently once the little one came along. When Betty got home with her son, Ali stopped approaching her altogether. So Betty decided to talk to her. Hello, can you sit down? The girl sat down, but she was tense as a string. I don't think you're happy to see your brother. I am. The girl was confused because she didn't expect such a direct question. And then we cried. I try not to think that you don't need me anymore. I can't. Betty sat down next to me. What are you doing, sweetie? I really need you more than I've ever needed you. They talked for a very long time. Betty scolded herself with the last words because she didn't understand how she could not have noticed such fears in the child. Let's take Daddy and go to the park this weekend. Andy, well, Andy is too young for that kind of fun. I think we'll have Adriana watch him. They just got to the third carousel and had one ice cream each. As Eugene then saw Adriana running towards them, Eugene and Betty. Betty stood up. The ice cream fell on the ground. Andy. What's wrong with him? She barely whispered those words. Adriana had already shouted them to Clara. She picked up Andy. Betty collapsed without feeling. Eugene grabbed the phone. All rushed to Betty. Betty, the woman, opened her eyes. She looked into Eugene's eyes. On ideas, I beg. Eugene, gritting his teeth. Clara showed up a week ago, said she was passing through, and would be very grateful if he would throw her some money, not as a favor, but as a friend. Eugene laughed in her face, said that if she did not disappear at once he would call the police. She screamed like a market wench, but she left anyway. He didn't tell Betty about it, so as not to upset her. He was sure Clara would leave, afraid to stay, so she didn't. The search had been going on for 24 hours. No one had seen anything. No one knew anything. Betty had become like a shadow. She flitted about the house, then ran outside. Eugene was in a similar state himself. There was no way Clara could have disappeared unnoticed. Once again, they arrived at the house. Adriana jumped out to meet them, but immediately realized there were no results. The older woman felt guilty. After all, she was the one who had undersighted. She turned away from the stroller in her own yard for a moment. And then she saw Clara, who with a child in her arms got into the car. Adriana ran after her. She didn't have her phone with her, and the park was close. When the car disappeared, Adriana rushed into the park. The old lady turned around, then Tool, and wanted to go inside. When I heard that I'd trade your puppy for money, I'm sick of his whining. At the gate stood Clara. In one hand, she had Andy in the other barrel, which was pointed at the child. Her eyes were glittering feverishly. Clara is calm, and I will give as much money as you want. There was a car behind Clara. Eugene recognized the security guard who worked for them from the driver. So that's how Betty looked at Clara with crazy eyes. I'm going to interrupt you. If my son has been harmed in the slightest by you. Clara laughed. It's all your fault. If you hadn't come to work here, I could have come back. Ollie was crying quietly. Give me a little brother, please. Clara turned to her. Do you want to take the baby brother? Go get it. You're a brave girl. Alla took a step forward. Then another. She held out her arms. Betty said, Alla, stay away from her. But it was too late. The girl stood beside her birth mother. The latter handed the child to Vanessa and laughed, pointing the barrel at the girl. But now you can claim all the money. You don't feel sorry for your hubby and give all the money for them. Eugene waved his head. No, I'm not. Let them go and I'll give you everything. But no, I don't believe you. The money first. Betty saw that Vanessa had stealthily taken 2 steps to the side. A couple more steps and they would be able to block her. But Clara saw it too. But hear the little shit. She threw down the barrel and Betty jumped on top of her. The women went down. The last thing Betty heard was Vanessa screaming and gunshots. How quiet and good it felt. Betty is floating in some kind of boat. It's a beautiful sunset. She'd seen a sunset like this before. And it was at the sea when she and Vanessa went to the sea for the first time after her illness. Where Vanessa and Andy were. But now Betty just knew they were there, and there was no worry. How good it is when nothing hurts, neither heart nor soul. She was ready to bob on the boat all her life, if only she could feel as good as she did. Mommy, Mommy. Betty wrinkled his nose a little. Someone was trying to disturb her peace of mind. Why would she feel so good? But the voice was insistent. A sort of uneasiness began to appear in her heart. She was really bothered by that voice. She tried not to listen, to cover her ears, but the ringing voice swept away all obstacles. The boat rocked. All around her the waves rose fierce. And Betty was carried away. It hurt her heart, and for some reason in her shoulder. And I don't know which pain was worse. Mommy, please come back. We're so sick without you. My hand was burned by something hot. Betty was scared. It was tears. Vanessa's tears, and the voice is hers too. She calls her Mommy. The nervous tension was building. How many times had she and Eugene talked about this topic? Betty had said she really wanted to be Vanessa's mommy, but if the girl couldn't call her that, she wouldn't ask, much less insist. And Vanessa, no matter how close the relationship between them was, would always call her Betty. Betty was thrashing around. She could hear Vanessa, but there was no way she could answer. She had to answer because her little girl was crying tears like drops of fire, burning her hand. Don't cry, it's okay. Vanessa froze. Was she imagining it? No. Betty lifted her eyelids with difficulty. The doctor's daddy. Eugene sat in the chair and swayed. Andy, well, for a week now, they come here as a family and sit by Betty's bedside. Valerie, of course, had been curled up right away, but Betty's injury was very serious. She underwent 2 surgeries, but never recovered. The doctors gave no prognosis, and Eugene tried not to think about the bad. When they left Betty, they first went into the neighboring ward. There Adriana was lying there after a heart attack. The whole business had been left to Maria Favors. In general, Eugene decided that when he returned, he would offer his press secretary to be his deputy and director. Because if it wasn't for her every day, she sent what she needed to take to the hospital. She wouldn't release anything from hygiene products to partner negotiations. The doctors kicked both Eugene and Vanessa out of the room. The girl was breaking down into sobs. "Daddy, say it's going to be okay. Say, Daddy." And he answered, "It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right." How could he possibly want to believe that? You can come through, but not for long. Betty needs a lot of sleep now. Eugene slowly stood up, looked at his daughter, then at the doctor. He smiled. "Your heroine is awake. I don't know what happened, but she just woke up." Betty asked her husband to lay down next to her. Tears slowly rolled down her cheeks with her hand. She held Vanessa lightly against her. "You, Mom. If you knew how long I've waited for this," she was crying too. Eugene was kneeling by the bed and his tears were flowing. "Woman, are you crazy? You can't get up, let alone walk." The family idyll was shattered by the loud voice of a nurse who tried to stop someone from entering the room. And then they heard Adriana 1 million in the left voice. "I need to get in there. Are you hiding something from me? You're not treating Betty well enough." The door swung open and Adriana appeared on the threshold, pushing a wheeled drip in front of her. Betty was the first one who couldn't stand it. She laughed a little audibly. Then Eugene. The picture really was like something out of a comic book magazine. A shot of Adriana tangled up with tubes, IVs, the tripod swinging gently, and a terrified nurse who just didn't know what to do. Following her father, Vanessa laughed, and even Andy smiled in his sleep. "Adriana, I watched everyone laugh for a while, and then proclaimed, 'Take this thing off me. I need to hug my family.'" Betty was on the mend. Eugene told me that Valerie had been declared sane and was about to go to trial, where she would get the full brunt of it. "You know, for the first time in my life, I don't feel sorry for her. She almost robbed me of the most precious thing about you. I hope her brains will fall into place." Betty didn't want to think about Clara or anything else. She wanted to enjoy her life here and now with the people she cared about around her.